"Spinach!" spluttered Carter Green explosively. "Where?" inquired the hungry tiger, coming to an abrupt stop and blinking around longingly. He was not very fond of spinach, but even spinach would taste better than nothing. "I didn't mean spinach exactly," mumbled the vegetable man hurriedly. "But look!" Pointing his twig-like finger to a bend in the road, Carter directed their attention to a weather-beaten sign. "Beware the ants," advised the sign mysteriously. "Oh, I hope they're not red ants," murmured Betsy anxiously. "Red ants bite." "Who's afraid of ants?" cried Reddy disdainfully. "All you have to do is tread on 'em." "That's right," agreed the hungry tiger. "I'm surprised at you, Carter, stopping us for a little thing like that. But suppose there were millions of them," shuddered the vegetable man uneasily. "I'd be a feast for ants." Betsy looked troubled, but the Prince of Rash, slapping his pocket suddenly, reminded her of the Rash rubies. "The rubies will protect us no matter what happens," declared Reddy confidently. "As soon as you see an ant, jump on my back," advised the hungry tiger calmly. "Then we'll all stick together and I'll run like 60. Carter shook his head and muttered unhappily to himself. He could not help remembering the sad accident to his ears. They all kept their eyes glued to the road for the first sign of the ants, the hungry tiger tiptoeing along almost as if he were walking on eggs. They were all so intent upon the road beneath their feet that they never thought of the road ahead at all. Then Betsy, suddenly looking up to see whether any towns or villages were visible, gave a shrill scream and clasped her arms round the tiger's neck. "Ants!" quavered Carter, leaping upon the hungry tiger and fastening both hands in Reddy's belt. Betsy was too shocked for speech, and it was the hungry tiger himself who answered Carter's query. "Ants!" coughed the hungry tiger, trembling like a leaf. "Giants!" And swinging about like a pivot, the terrified beast raced off in the opposite direction. But the giants had already seen them. There were 4 of the huge creatures, and Betsy, glancing fearfully over her shoulder, saw the smallest, a perfectly tremendous little girl, Giant, beginning to gain on them. The hungry tiger did his best, but who could hope to outdistance a creature whose every step covered a city block? "Father! Father!" shrilled the little giant in a voice that shook the hills. "See that darling little kitten?" Before the luckless travelers had time to plan, think, or act, a great hand came snatching downward and seized the hungry tiger by the scruff of the neck. Up went the tiger, off went the 3 riders, and, turning 7 somersaults, landed together in a hayfield. By the time they had picked themselves up, the giants were a mile down the road. "They're worse than gnomes," sputtered Carter indignantly. "Called the hungry tiger a kitten, did you hear that? It's a wonder that great girl didn't break us to bits." "She would have if we had not had the rubies," panted Everett, picking up his sword. "We must have fallen 1/4 mile. Weren't you scared, Betsy?" Betsy shivered, but recovering herself quickly ran out into the road and tried to catch a last glimpse of the hungry tiger. "We'll have to go after them," she cried. "That girl needn't think she can have the hungry tiger for a kitten. Why, he must be furious. I'm glad she didn't pick me for a pet," exclaimed Carter, walking briskly up and down to keep from taking root. "Let's go on, Betsy. Maybe the giants live around here somewhere, and maybe we can help the hungry tiger to escape." "I'm not afraid of giants," asserted Reddy in a slightly shaky voice. "Come on, we've the Rash rubies to protect us." Trying to keep up their courage and assuming a bravery they were very far from feeling, the 3 adventurers started off in the direction the giants had taken.
"Well, I hope we don't meet any more,"
sighed Betsy, pressing closer to the vegetable man.
"and I hope we find the hungry tiger before night-time."
The sun had set, and in the gray twilight the trees and bushes took on fearsome shapes and forms. Keeping close together and conversing in scared whispers, they hurried anxiously along. Soon large and disturbing signs began to appear on both sides of the road. This country belongs to the big wigs. Keep out, advised the signs. Big wigs, breathed Betsy nervously.
Why, they must be the giants.
See how high the fences are, and the trees are so tall I cannot even see the tops, gasped Reddy. Feeling smaller than ever, the two children and Carter tiptoed down the long dark lanes and presently came to the giant city itself. All they could see was a grim gray wall stretching up toward the sky. Hanging in niches of the wall at regular distances were great yellow lanterns, and traced on the wall itself in flaming letters stood the town's name. "Immense city," quavered the vegetable man in a choked voice. "Well, I should say it was." "If there were only a gate," mourned Betsy, "we might peek through. Oh dear, I do hope the hungry tiger is safe." "He's safe enough," groaned Carter, looking sadly at the great wall. "But how are we ever to get into him?" The only entrance to Immense City seemed to be a huge stone door in the center of the wall, and it was locked and bolted with bars as big as telegraph poles. Over the wall came a confused murmur of voices, the rumble of wheels, and a muffled sound of music, while drifting down to the tired, hungry travelers came the delicious smell of 100 giant dinners cooking. "Just one giant biscuit would be enough for us," sighed Betsy, sniffing the air wistfully. "I'll bet it would be as big as you are, Reddy." "What's the use of wishing?" sighed the little prince gloomily. "We can never climb over the wall, and there's nothing to eat on this side. I almost wish we had stayed downtown." Both children looked so downhearted that Carter saw at once that something must be done. So, bidding them keep close together, the vegetable man went off in search of supper. The lanterns from the city wall spread their radiance for miles around, and it was not long before Carter came to a great apple orchard. Climbing the trees was impossible, but scattered about on the ground were apples the size of pumpkins. Taking one of the smallest, the vegetable man hurried back to the others. In spite of its size, the apple was of delicious flavor. Reddy cut it into slices with his sword, and he and Betsy grew so merry over their strange supper that Carter felt well repaid for his trouble. "Tomorrow," promised the vegetable man gaily, "we will find a way into the city and rescue our old friend." "And tonight?" queried Betsy uneasily. "Tonight we will rest," answered Carter calmly, as if sleeping under the walls of a giant city were quite a usual affair. Gathering leaves and twigs, he made Betsy and Everett comfortable beds in the shelter of a giant elm. For himself, he collected a pile of rocks. "So I'll not take root," he explained with a wink. The leafy beds were so soft, and Betsy and Reddy so weary they soon fell asleep, but Carter on his rocky couch never closed his eyes. Chapter 13. Beside the Wall. The bright sun awakened Betsy and Reddy next morning. Betsy had been dreaming of the Emerald City and was but half awake. Rubbing her eyes, she stared in bewilderment at the high walls of Immense City.
"Oh, dear,"
mused the little girl, heaving a sigh of disappointment.
"We're still here, aren't we?"
"I should say we are," answered Carter. "And when you think of all we've been through, it's quite a miracle, Betsy, my child, to even be here." Carter had brushed back his celery tops, perked up his ears, washed his red cheeks in the brook, and looked fresh as only a vegetable man may. "I wonder if the big wigs ever use that door?" yawned the little Prince of Rash, rolling over sleepily. "Just what I was wondering," murmured Carter. "Now my plan is this. Let us watch the door carefully. Then, when it opens, we will slip in unnoticed and look around for the hungry tiger. But we must be mighty careful not to get run over or trodden upon by the giants." Betsy turned a trifle pale at mention of the giants, but Reddy hastened to reassure her. "I'll take care of you, Betsy," promised the little prince boldly, "and the rubies will help even if the giants do catch us." Somewhat comforted, but not absolutely convinced, Betsy ran over to the brook, and after she and Reddy splashed their hands and faces with the cool water and took a long drink from a nearby spring, they both felt quite adventurous and cheerful. "We'll not bother about breakfast," decided Carter, "for I've a notion there'll be plenty inside. Do you really suppose they'll open the gate?" asked Betsy, quite excited at the prospect of entering a giant city. "Well, the 4 bigwigs we met on the road must have come out that way," observed Carter, blinking up at the enormous tulip trees surrounding the bigwig town. Each leaf was large as a person, and Carter was about to pick one up from the ground and fashion it into a hat for Betsy when a perfect shower of rocks came flying over the wall. While none actually hit the 3 travelers, they were so startled by the suddenness of the attack that they stood frozen to the spot. Then Carter, seizing Betsy, darted behind a tree. Before Reddy could join them, a flock of monstrous pigeons swooped down from the wall and began pecking greedily at the rocks. "Why, they're giant crumbs!" cried Betsy, peering around the tree in astonishment. "Did you ever see such big birds? Why, they're big as ostriches." "Bigger," gulped Carter, anxiously motioning for Reddy to hide himself. But just then one of the pigeons, taking the little boy for a crumb or a tempting little bug, snapped him up in its bill and soared over the wall of the city. "Stop! Come back! Help! Help!" shouted Carter Green, while Betsy jumped up and down with terror and astonishment. But the pigeons on the ground continued to peck at the crumbs, and the pigeon that had carried off the little prince was as gone as yesterday.
Will it eat him?
cried Betsy tearfully. "Oh, Carter, what shall we do now?" And with Reddy and the hungry tiger both gone, things looked dark indeed. The vegetable man had no idea what to do nor how to do it, but, determined to comfort Betsy, he began talking so confidently and cheerfully that she soon dried her tears. "No harm can come to Reddy, for he still has the rash rubies," he reminded her gaily. "And all we have to do is wait here till someone opens the door in the wall. Then we'll find the hungry tiger and Reddy and continue our journey to Oz." After the pigeons had flown away, Carter rolled one of the giant crumbs over to the little girl. Breaking off the crust, which was a bit stale, they found the inside soft and fresh, and while it was not exactly the breakfast she would have chosen, Betsy managed to satisfy her hunger. Then, sitting down on the twisted roots of a tulip tree, they waited impatiently for the doors of immense city to open. But nothing of the kind happened, and as the morning wore away, Carter grew terribly uneasy. He was more anxious about Reddy and the hungry tiger than he cared to admit. Afraid to leave the spot for fear the door would open while they were away, the two stared anxiously at the wall. But it was a weary business, and more Betsy began to wonder why Ozma did not come to her assistance. There were plenty of crumbs for Betsy's lunch and supper, but as night drew on and still no one came to open the door, Carter decided to take matters into his own hands. Slowly a plan was forming in the vegetable man's mind, and as the moon rose up over the tulip trees, he explained it carefully to Betsy Bobbin. "Tonight," announced Carter in a firm voice, "I will plant my feet close to the walls of the city. In giant soil I ought to grow very rapidly, and by morning should reach the top of the wall. Then I will bend over and grow downward till I touch the ground on the other side."
"But what will become of me?"
cried Betsy, looking at Carter with frightened eyes. "You will grow with me," said the vegetable man calmly. "I will take you in my arms, and we will grow up together."
"Then what?" asked the little girl doubtfully. "How will you grow down again?"
"I won't," answered the vegetable man resignedly. "But I'm not important, Betsy dear, and shall doubtless make some sort of useful vine or tree."
"I don't want you to be a vine," wailed the little girl in dismay. "Please don't be a vine and leave me all alone."
"But we must think of the others," Carter pointed out gently. "Once inside the city you will find the hungry tiger and Reddy, and with the help of the rash rubies manage to escape. When you reach Oz, perhaps Ozma will find a way to have me transported and transplanted in the Emerald City."
"I'd like to be near you, Betsy," sighed the vegetable man wistfully.
In vain Betsy reasoned, argued, and coaxed. Carter's mind was fully made up. It grew darker and darker as they talked, And just as the lanterns flashed out from the bigwig wall, the vegetable man picked her up in his arms and ran over to the great barred door. Standing as close to the wall as he could squeeze, Carter set Betsy on his shoulder and resolutely planted his feet in the soft earth and gazed up into the darkness. "Now then," chuckled Carter, assuming a jaunty and carefree air to reassure the little girl, "I'm rooting for you, Betsy dear, and tomorrow we'll grow over the top." But at that instant there was a loud thump on the other side of the wall. With a screech, the door crunched open and a giant foot was thrust through. "Betsy! Betsy!" bellowed a terrible bigwig voice. "Where are you, Betsy?" Betsy Bobbin stared at the vegetable man, and he stared at the giant foot. There was something familiar about that foot, but what was it? Chapter 14. The Airmen of Oz. Betsy had been perfectly right in supposing Princess Ozma would soon discover her absence from the castle. Dorothy had gone home with the Tin Woodman, so, of course, knew nothing about it. But when Betsy did not appear for breakfast, Ozma immediately sent Jellia Jam, her small maid-in-waiting, upstairs to search for her. Ozma herself hurried out into the garden, thinking Betsy might be gathering a breakfast bouquet. Shading her eyes, Ozma looked in every direction, but there was no sign of Betsy anywhere. She was about to return to the castle when a loud bump sounded just behind her. Spinning about, Ozma saw the strangest sort of figure sprawled over her favorite rose bush. It was 4 times the size of a regular man. The body something like a tremendous sausage, with a round, balloon-shaped head and pudgy arms and legs. While Ozma was trying to determine what kind of being it was, the huge creature rose with a bounce and came clumping toward her. "I told Zeph there were people at the bottom of the air," puffed the stranger gleefully. "Here is one now. I'll take it straight back to the sky for proof." Ozma had just time to notice that he wore heavy iron boots when he bent over and, tucking her under his arm as if she had been a package of sugar plums, kicked off one boot and then the other and soared, like a balloon released from its string, straight up toward the sky. It was all so unexpected and breathtaking for several minutes, Ozma was perfectly paralyzed. Then, glancing down and seeing her lovely castle fading to a mere speck below, she began to squirm and struggle and pound with both hands upon the arm of her captor. "Take me back, put me down," commanded Ozma imperiously. "How dare you carry me off like this?" But her tiny fists made no impression on the great fellow. He seemed to be constructed of some tough silken substance, and from the way he dented in when she poked him, Ozma concluded he was filled with air. "Like a balloon," thought the princess. "Oh, please, please stop," she called despairingly. The voice of the little fairy came wafting faintly up to the airman, and, with an interested sniff, he took Ozma from beneath his arm and held her on a level with his nose. The quick change made her exceedingly dizzy, and while she recovered herself, he examined her most attentively. He was swimming in the air all the time, with his feet in a strange climbing motion, and their flight upward never slackened during the conversation that followed. "What a pretty little creature it is," mused the airman half aloud. His voice was so kind and his face so round and jolly that Ozma took heart and began begging him to return her to the earth. "I am a princess," she explained earnestly, "and anything may happen to my kingdom while I am away. Something has happened already." Breathlessly, she began to tell of the disappearance of Betsy Bobbin and of the perils that might overtake her in a magic country like Oz. But the airman seemed more interested in Ozma's voice and appearance than in her story. "Why, it's talking airish," he chuckled with a pleased grin. "And what splendid proof a princess will be when I deliver my lecture next month before the Cloud Country gentlemen. Fellow airman, I shall say, it has long been a matter of dispute as to whether any life exists in the lower levels of the air, but now the question is settled for all time. The earth is undoubtedly populated by small, fragile princesses like this." Here he paused and held Ozma up as if displaying her to an imaginary audience.
Oh,
Please stop and listen to me, entreated Ozma. Then she gave a great gasp, for without warning the sky darkened, and in their swift flight they barely escaped the gleaming point of a star. "Don't be alarmed," murmured the airman, feeling the little fairy tremble in his grasp. "Night has fallen. The higher we go, the faster time flies. It will be daylight in a few moments." "That's one of the advantages of high living," he continued comfortably. "One grows up so quickly, and time flies so fast we never are bored. See, it is tomorrow already." "Tomorrow?" wailed Ozma, blinking in the sudden sunlight that came flooding through the clouds. "How dreadful! Oh dear, Mr. Balloon Man, do take me back to my castle." "Atmos is my name," announced the airman a bit stiffly. "Atmos Fairy. I'm a skyman, and I could not take you back, even I wanted to, for I have left my diving boots on the earth." "You'll grow used to it up here," he assured her, and turning on his back began to float lazily toward a long purple cloud, still holding Ozma aloft so he could more easily observe her. "A most interesting specimen," he muttered over and over, squinting at the little fairy approvingly. "I'm not a specimen, I'm a princess," declared Ozma indignantly. "I do not wish to live in the sky." "Oh dear, oh my, what will become of Oz while I am away?" "Now you're unreasonable," sighed Atmos reproachfully. "What will become of my lecture if I let you go? Do you think for one instant any air body would believe me when I told them there were living creatures at the bottom of the air? I must have proof, and you are my proof, little princess. You should feel honored to have been discovered by a well-known explorer. You shall have an air castle all to yourself, and the lecture will only take a few years of your time." "Hello, it's night again." And sure enough it was. Shivering in the darkness, Ozma began to fully realize the awful perils of her position. It might be years before she saw her old friends and the lovely Emerald City again. Being a fairy, Ozma knew that she herself would not grow older, but what might not happen in Oz during her long absence? Clasping her hands desperately, the little princess tried to think of some way to help herself, and as the sun came flashing through the clouds again, a dreadful plan popped into her head. Atmos was still talking. "After the lecture, there will be a dinner," droned the airman sleepily. "That will take about 7 years, I should say, though I've known sky banquets to last as long as 10. 10! Moaned Ozma with a little shudder, and steeled by the thought of a 10-year banquet, she drew an emerald pin from her dress and thrust it quickly into the airman's side. Then, covering her face with both hands, she began to cry softly, for this tender-hearted little fairy had never hurt anyone in her whole gentle life, and could not bear to even think of what she had done. For several seconds the airman's calm conversation continued. Then all at once he gave a great gulp. "Princess!" gasped the airman in a faint voice. "I seem to be losing my breath." Ozma felt a rush of cold air past her ears, and next instant they were tumbling earthward over and over and over, down through clouds and mists and great blue stretches of empty air. How she managed during that long, dizzy fall to keep hold of the airman's limp arm she never knew herself. But hold on she did, and after what seemed to be hours and hours, they landed together in a feathery field of wheat. The sudden plunge downward had kept all the air from escaping from the airman, but as Ozma rolled over and saw his pitiable condition, she began to weep anew. His legs and body were perfectly limp, and the air was issuing from his right arm with a shrill whistling sound. "Save me!" panted Atmos, rolling his eyes wildly from side to side. "Save me! Can't you see I'm expiring?" "But what can I do?" sobbed Ozma in a panic. "Tie something round my neck," directed the airman desperately. "Keep the air in my head." Snatching the ribbon from her curls, Ozma hastened to do as he suggested, shivering a little as she pulled the ribbon tight. "I'd like to know how this happened," moaned Atmos, as the little fairy tied the ribbon in a neat bow under his poor wrinkled chin. "It was my fault," confessed Ozma, covering her face so she could not see him. "I stuck you with a pin. You wouldn't let me go, and I couldn't leave Oz for all those years." "Oh dear, oh dear."
"I'm so sorry." And remorseful tears began to trickle through her fingers and drop on the airman's nose. "Punctured by a princess," puffed Atmos, as if he could not get the idea through his head at all. Well, who would have thought it? She looked so harmless and sweet, too. "I think I should be the one to cry," he observed presently. And as the little fairy's sobs grew more and more violent, he lifted his head and regarded her with positive alarm. "Don't cry like that," begged Atmos uncomfortably. "It didn't hurt, you know, and I have expired in the cause of high science. That's a great honor. Besides, I should not have carried you off." "Don't cry," he begged, trying frantically to rise, but the more he coaxed and blamed himself, the harder Ozma wept, so that neither of them heard the approaching steps of a stranger. "Hello!" cried a bluff voice suddenly. "What's the matter here? Did you bust your balloon, little girl, or what?" Glancing up, Ozma saw a tall, red-faced fellow in a leather apron just behind her. The head of the airman did look like a great balloon, and while Ozma quickly dried her tears, Atmos simply stared at the newcomer, almost forgetting his misfortune in his curiosity.
"What is this?"
he whispered huskily. "I thought Earth was inhabited by princesses like yourself. Is this a princess, too?" "Ha, ha, ha!" roared the stranger, slapping his great thigh. "Do I look like a princess?" Then, as the curiousness of a balloon's conversing struck him, his eyes grew rounder, and his mouth hung open with astonishment. "It's an airman," explained Ozma with dignity, "and I am the Princess of Oz." "Airman," muttered the big fellow under his breath. "Oz. Well, I've heard of Oz, but you're a long way from home, little lady. And where on earth did you pick up this fellow?"
"He's from the sky,"
Ozma hastened to inform him. "And I've had a serious accident," added Atmos, to save the little fairy from telling her part in the affair. "You look like an accident," observed the stranger, kneeling down beside the collapsed form of the airman. "Was it a puncture or an explosion?" A puncture," sighed Atmos with a sidelong glance at Ozma. "But what manner of earth creature are you?" "I'm an ornamental iron worker," announced the stranger proudly. "There's my shack over yonder. Rusty Ore is my name, and say—" He rose and looked triumphantly at the little fairy. "I believe I could blow this fellow up again. I've a bellows in the shop. Shall I try?"
"Oh, could you? Would you?"
begged the little princess, clasping her hands eagerly. The more Rusty looked at lovely little Ozma, the surer he became that he could. Everyone who saw Ozma had an immediate desire to serve her, and the ornamental ironworker was no exception. Rolling the airman into a neat bundle, he slung him over his shoulder. Then, taking Ozma's hand, strode briskly across the fields.
"Have you anything to eat in your house?"
asked the little princess, skipping to keep up with Rusty's long strides. "I haven't had anything to eat for 2 days." "2 days!" bellowed the ironworker indignantly, and sweeping Ozma up into his arms, he broke into a run so that almost before they knew it they had reached his queer little shop. Chapter 15. Rusty Ore to the Rescue. While Ozma, perched on Rusty's rude bench, nibbled hungrily at the big sandwich he had brought her, Atmos looked around him with interest and frank curiosity. The little shop was filled with iron deer, fire irons, iron daubs, and weathercocks, too. Rusty had placed the punctured airman on top of a scrap heap while he went to search for his bellows that he might blow him up. "Is this an earth castle?" asked Atmos, as Rusty disappeared through the doorway. "Are there many creatures like this at the bottom of the air?" "Rusty is a man. There are plenty of men, women, children, kings, queens, and animals down here," answered Ozma, hardly knowing how to begin to tell an airman about the real and unreal countries of the earth.
Everyone here does not live in a castle, she went on seriously. Most people live in houses or on farms.
What's a farm? Asked Atmos with a puzzled frown. Do you know, little princess, I think I had better explore this country a bit further before I'm blown up. Think what a lecture I can give on the wonders at the bottom of the sky.
Why don't you?
Asked Ozma, swallowing the last bite of the sandwich.
What?
Inquired Rusty, returning just then with the bellows. I was just remarking to the princess that I'd like to see more of your Earth before I return to the sky, confided Atmos, blinking his round eyes at the ironworker. But as soon as I'm blown up and patched, I'll fly straight upward.
How did you manage before? Questioned Rusty, sitting down on the bench beside Ozma.
Well, said Atmos, a friend of mine who lives on the mountains of the moon made me a pair of iron boots. These enabled me to sink through the air and walk about the bottom of the sky, which you call the earth. I wanted to find out if the earth was inhabited. Putting on the boots, I dove from the tip of the moon and landed in a strange and lovely garden, where the first object that met my eyes was the lovely little lady before us. Delighted with my find, I picked this princess from the garden, kicked off my boots, and flew back to the sky, carrying her along as proof.
Proof? Blustered Rusty, jumping up indignantly. How dare you steal a princess for proof, you old rascal? What shall I do to him? He puffed, turning angrily to Ozma.
Oh, nothing, please do nothing, begged the little fairy in alarm.
He did not really mean any harm, and I'm down on Earth again. Besides, Ozma's voice sank to a low whisper.
Besides, I punctured him with a pin.
You did, exclaimed Rusty admiringly.
Well, good for you.
Yes, sighed Atmos sorrowfully. It was good for her, but exceedingly bad for me. Still, I can see now that it was wrong for me to carry her away, and if you'll find some way to blow me up and keep me down, I'll take her safely back to her castle.
Now you're talking like a real man instead of a windbag, said Rusty approvingly. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll make you a pair of iron shoes myself, blow you up, patch you up, and start you in the right direction. How would that be?
Ozma was so delighted with the ironworker's plan that she gave him a hearty hug, and as Rusty started to work on the boots at once, it was not long before they were finished and standing in the doorway to cool. Blowing Atmos up was a ticklish and dangerous operation. Carrying the airman outside, Rusty placed him on the ground. Then, placing the bellows in his side, he began to work it slowly and carefully, while Ozma watched to see that each arm and leg had the same amount of air. Before they started, Rusty had weighted Atmos down with an iron bucket and an iron stag, but as the body of the airman filled out, he grew so light and buoyant they had to add the anchor and a couple of chains.
Not too much now, warned Ozma, anxiously untying the ribbon from the airman's throat. Not too much or he'll burst. But Atmos did not burst, and when Rusty saw he had exactly filled out his strange silken skin, he pulled out the bellows, clapped a neat patch over the puncture, and stood back to admire this curious citizen of the air. Atmos himself began to bounce, swing his arms, and sing aloud for pure joy. "Excuse my singing," chuckled the airman, "but I'm full of fresh air and you have no idea how fine it feels." "Well, don't put on airs with us," muttered Rusty, who was really alarmed at the airman's size.
"Do you think he's safe?" he whispered nervously to Ozma.
Ozma nodded enthusiastically, and, somewhat reassured, Rusty went off to pack her a lunch for the journey back home. By this time the boots had cooled, and, with great difficulty, Rusty fitted them to the airman's puffy feet, released him from the iron weights and chains, and helped him to rise. Ozma watched with great interest, for she was not at all sure the boots would keep Atmos on the earth. But after a few skips and flutters, the airman began to walk soberly up and down, and with a pleased smile declared himself ready to start. Rusty was sorry to have the little princess go, but when she explained the strange disappearance of Betsy Bobbin and how she must return at once to the Emerald City and try to discover her whereabouts in the magic picture, he reluctantly bade her goodbye. "You are on the edge of the Gnome King's dominions," said Rusty, "and if you travel straight ahead you will come to the deadly desert. With iron boots, Atmos should have no trouble crossing the burning sands, and if he carries you on his shoulder, no harm will come to you." "I have never seen a desert," said Atmos eagerly, "for there are no deserts in the sky. Come, little princess, let us go at once." Giving Rusty a farewell embrace and thanking him again for all his kindness, Ozma ran after the airman who had already started toward the south. "Goodbye," called Rusty as they turned to wave to him from a little hill. "Be careful not to tread on her toes." The country through which they were passing was barren and wild, and not at all interesting to Ozma, but the airman stopped and exclaimed over every tree and boulder, collecting so many leaves, flowers, sticks, and small stones that his air pockets were soon bulging. "I'm really quite glad I was punctured," he remarked happily. "Otherwise I should have missed all this." Ozma nodded, a bit impatiently, for she was thinking of all she had missed during her strange 2 days in the air, and wondering what had become of Betsy Bobbin. "Maybe she's been home all the time," sighed the little princess, "and won't she be astonished when I tell her where I have been? Oh dear, I do wish he would hurry." "If you put any more stones in your pocket, you'll never be able to fly," she cautioned gently, "and if we don't walk a little faster, we'll never reach the Emerald City at all." "That's so," puffed the airman, and straightening up, he reluctantly dropped a handful of pebbles. "But walking is so monotonous. In the air we can drift, float, swim, or fly, and so we never grow tired." "It must be very nice," agreed Ozma politely, "but don't you think you could walk a little faster?" "We're going to have a storm," she added, glancing up at the sky, which was full of dark clouds. "Oh, Atmos, let's run and maybe we'll reach a house before it breaks." "Breaks?" panted the airman, clumping clumsily after the light-footed little fairy. "What will it break? Us?" "Don't you ever have any storms in the sky?" called Ozma over her shoulder. Atmos shook his head solemnly. "We're above all that sort of thing," grunted the airman, trying his best to keep up with Ozma. "Dear me, how dreadfully disagreeable." The sky had grown dark by this time, and the rain was falling in torrents. Blinding flashes of lightning and loud crashes of thunder added to the confusion, and when large hailstones came pelting down upon their heads, Atmos stopped in positive alarm. "Princess, princess," choked the airman, groping toward Ozma in the dark. "Get me out of this, or I'll be punctured. If I only had my magic belt," gasped Ozma, pushing back her wet hair. "I could wish us both to the Emerald City. Oh dear, I do wish there was a house somewhere." Scarcely had the words been spoken before a house sprang up at the little girl's feet, so suddenly, in fact, that it tumbled her over backwards. The morning before she left her castle, Ozma had slipped one of the wizard's wishing powders into her pocket. But shoestrings and button-hooks! The little girl had not been careful to say what kind of house she wanted, and there, perched askew on the dripping rocks, stood a doghouse. While Atmos stared at it in a daze, thinking it too had fallen from the sky, and Ozma picked herself up in astonishment, a cross doggy face appeared in the doorway. "Woof!" rumbled the dog threateningly. Where he had been wished from, I cannot say, but the journey had been unexpected and rough, and seeing 2 total strangers standing outside, the dog immediately decided they were responsible for the accident. Paying no attention to the rain or hail, he dashed furiously out and tried to bury his teeth in the airman's leg. Thanks to his iron boots, Atmos was not punctured, and as the dog made a spring at Ozma, the airman snatched the little fairy up in his arms and began running in a way he had not believed possible. So swiftly did Atmos run that the barks of the dog soon died away in the distance and the storm was left far behind them.
"Stop! Stop!" begged Ozma when she could finally make the airman hear her. "Stop, Atmos, dear. Atmosphera, you're running the wrong way. Oh, do take care. There's something queer about this country." With a final puff, Atmos brought himself to a stop, or at least he tried to. But the earth beneath his feet was behaving most unaccountably, moving along in big brown waves and carrying him tumbling along with it. They had unluckily run into the great rolling country of the East, mentioned by a few explorers, but seldom crossed by ordinary travelers. Standing first on one foot and then the other, Atmos tried wildly to keep his balance, but in a moment a heavy mud wave struck him behind the knees and rolled him over, so that he and the little Princess of Oz were soon being buffeted along like tiny ships on an unruly ocean. When the waves broke, which they frequently did, sticks, stones, pebbles, and dust showered over their heads. In fact, a more miserable mode of travel cannot be imagined. "Let us fly," choked the frightened airman, clutching Ozma's hand. "Say the word, little princess, and I'll kick off my boots and carry you up to safety." "No, not that," coughed Ozma in a panic. "Wait, Atmos, something will turn up." Chapter 16. Reddy and the Giants. While Carter and Betsy waited so impatiently outside the walls, the little Prince of Rash was having an amazing day with the giants. After a dizzy flight through the air, the great pigeon, attracted by a bit of stale cake on the ledge of a high window, had dropped him carelessly on the sill. Fortunately for Reddy, the window was open, and, squirming through, he lay panting and pale, waiting for the bird to snap him up again. But the space was too narrow, and after a few angry pecks at the pane, the pigeon flew away. With a gulp of relief, the prince rolled over and sat up. A delicious smell of coffee, bacon, and rolls came floating upward, and, glancing over the edge of the sill, Reddy saw that he was in an enormous dining hall. Far below the window stood the giant sideboard, covered with serving dishes the size of bathtubs, and seated at a huge table in the center of the room, two giants were eating porridge with spoons as large as snow shovels. They had golden crowns upon their heads, and from the richness of their robes and the elegance of the whole apartment, Reddy guessed, and quite rightly, that he was in the castle of immense city itself. Waiting upon their majesties were 4 monstrous footmen, and all of the giants wore huge white wigs, the curls of which bounced and bobbed when they walked in a truly comical fashion. Crouching in a corner of the sill and trusting that none of the giants would notice him, the hungry little boy watched the king and queen toss off huge basins of coffee, devour biscuits as big as boulders, and pancakes broad enough to cover an ordinary-sized table. In these immense surroundings, Reddy felt so little, lost and lonely, that all thought of finding and rescuing the hungry tiger seemed hopeless. How was he even to reach the floor without breaking himself to bits? Therefore he listened listlessly to the booming voices of the bigwigs, and fervently wished himself back with the Vegetable Man and Betsy Bobbin. But a cross remark of the giant king suddenly caught his attention and made him prick up his ears. "That kitten," growled the big wig in a fierce voice, frowning across the table at the queen. "That kitten must go. It kept me awake the entire night with its miserable meowing." "But what will Elma do?" murmured the queen gently. "Our daughter dotes on the little creature." "Let her find something else to dote on," puffed his majesty indignantly. "My castle is no place for stray cats." "If it's here tomorrow," continued the giant, blowing his cheeks in and out threateningly, "I'll throw it in the pond." Snatching up his paper, the king strode from the room, every curl in his wig expressing wrath and determination. "Stray kitten," gasped Reddy in relief, remembering the little giant girl's words. "Why, that must be the hungry tiger." The knowledge that his old friend was still safe and close at hand was so encouraging. The little prince cheered up at once, for after all, Reddy was a prince and naturally brave and resourceful.
If the hungry tiger were still in the castle, he should certainly be able to find him, and together they would devise some way of escape. The queen, still arguing about her daughter's kitten, had waddled after her husband, and while the big-wig footman cleared away the breakfast dishes, Reddy tried to think of some plan to reach the floor in safety. He put his hands in his pockets, stared nervously over the edge of the sill, then gave an exclamation of glee, for his fingers had closed over the rash rubies. The rubies! Why had he not thought of them before? If one of them had carried him safely down the furious firefall, why would it not help him now? Without disturbing the dishes on the side table, the footman had gone to the kitchen. So, closing both eyes and gritting his teeth, Reddy jumped boldly off the window ledge. He landed with a crash, splash, and splutter, and, opening his eyes, found himself looking through the glass sides of the giant's water pitcher. The water was over his head, but he felt no discomfort, except a slight chill from the ice, for in his pocket was the ruby protecting him from all danger by water. Disturbed because he had not looked more carefully before he jumped, but elated over the way the rubies were working, the little prince rose to the top of the pitcher. Luckily for him, the water reached almost to the brim, and seizing the pitcher's edge, he pulled himself up and dropped easily over the side. This time he landed beside a flat plate of sizzling hot cakes and bacon, and we cannot blame him for stopping long enough to hack off a few slices of each with his sword. This, with several crumbs from the giant biscuits, made an excellent breakfast, and stuffing a large piece of pancake in his pocket for lunch, the little boy jumped gaily off the sideboard. Thanks to the other ruby, he floated lightly as a feather down to the floor, and then began his long walk to the kitchen. His clothes were still wet and dripping from the unexpected bath, but his spirits were high, and he was beginning to enjoy his strange experiences and to look forward with lively anticipation to his meeting with the hungry tiger. A brisk 15-minute walk brought him to the kitchen door, and, slipping through, he saw the big-wig servants seated at a large table. Their loud voices made his head thump, and to bring their faces into view, he had to lean so far over backwards, he soon had a severe pain in his neck. But he was sure he would learn from them the whereabouts of little Elma, and once he knew that, finding the hungry tiger would be almost easy. Compared with the giants, Reddy was about the size of a small doll, and none of the chattering bigwigs noticed the little boy crouched behind the coal bucket. After listening to a great deal of conversation that did not interest him at all, Reddy was finally rewarded with the information he was seeking. "Where's little Elma's tray?" wheezed a bigwig maid, suddenly pushing back her chair. "That girl grows lazier every day." "There," grunted the cook, pointing a pudgy finger toward the dresser, "and it's high time you took it up to her, you ill-natured clod." After exchanging a few more rude remarks, the maid picked up the tray and started toward a back stairway. Frantically, Reddy began to run after her, risking discovery by the others in his anxiety to keep her in view. But it was a hopeless race, and he had just given up in despair when the giantess came hurrying back for the salt which she had forgotten. Almost treading on the breathless little boy, she snatched a salt shaker from the dresser and started off again, but this time Reddy went with her. The strings of the maid's apron reached almost to the floor, and with a mighty spring the little prince seized one of the fluttering ends and hung on for dear life. Unconscious of her passenger, the giantess briskly mounted the stair, Reddy swinging round and round at each step and hoping heartily that the apron string would not come untied. After a very bumpy journey, the little boy found himself at the top of the stair and next instant in the presence of the little giant princess herself. She was seated in a chair in the largest playroom you could ever imagine and looked extremely comical in her great white wig. Letting go the maid's apron string, Reddy dropped to the floor and, creeping behind a toy block, peered around in amazement. Dolls as big as himself were strewn about the floor. Noah's arks, Toy barns, doll houses, and castles as large as our own dwellings were ranged along one side of the wall, and here and there were stuffed and wooden animals of just the right size for Reddy to ride. There was a toy train he longed to start and a wooden circus that made his heart thump with excitement. "I wish Betsy were here," thought the little prince. "Couldn't we have fun?" "I wish she could see these dolls." Scarcely hearing the clatter of dishes on the tray, as the princess greedily ate her breakfast, Reddy's eyes roved enviously over the vast collection of toys. A sudden thump, as the little giantess jumped out of her chair, recalled him to the serious purpose of his visit. Princess Elma, with a saucer of cream in her hands, was pattering toward him, calling at the top of her voice, "Here, Kitty, Kitty, Kitty! Where are you, Kitty dear?" The thought of the hungry tiger as a little girl's kitten was so ridiculous that Reddy chuckled in spite of himself. And when little Elma, after several unsuccessful attempts, dragged the tiger from beneath the low sofa and began dipping his nose in the cream, Reddy laughed outright. The hungry tiger was growling and snarling so ferociously, and Elma filling the air with such boisterous terms of endearment that neither of them heard. After a futile struggle with the giantess, the tiger settled himself on the floor and began to lap up the cream with an expression of unhappy and hopeless resignation. Squatting on the floor beside him, the princess continued to shower him with vigorous caresses. "Finish your breakfast, sweet," she cooed in a voice like a ferryboat whistle. "Then Mother'll take you for a nice little ride in the doll coach." Reddy hoped to have a few words with the hungry tiger and began to creep cautiously toward the strange pair. But just as he came within hailing distance, the hungry tiger finished the cream, and Elma lifted him joyfully into the air. Torn between mirth and sympathy, Reddy watched the giantess dress the indignant and struggling tiger in a doll coat and cap, tuck him unceremoniously into a doll coach, and wheel him out of the nursery. "I'll have to wait till they come back," sighed Reddy, as the doll coach went bumping down the entry and the shrill protests of the hungry tiger grew fainter and fainter. "And while I wait, I might as well look around." This proved so interesting that he was surprised to hear the great clock on the mantel strike 12. As there was still no sign of the hungry tiger, he sensibly decided to eat his lunch. Choosing the coziest of the doll houses, he walked boldly up the front steps and into the dining room. The chairs and table were exactly the right size, and with a little chuckle of enjoyment, Reddy set the table, drew up a chair, and ate his piece of pancake in peace and comfort. The dollhouse was complete in every detail, and in the kitchen cupboard the little boy found canisters of tea, coffee, and sugar. There was a small gas stove that really worked, so Reddy made himself a cup of coffee and finished his lunch with a box of stale cakes he found on the dresser. Then, feeling a little sleepy, he curled up on the doll lounge in the living room and had a fine nap. After this, he amused himself trying on the doll hats and coats he found in the entry closet and sliding down the curved banister. By this time it was 4 o'clock, and growing a little anxious about the hungry tiger, Reddy ran out of the dollhouse to see if the princess had returned. But the nursery was still deserted, and after trying in vain to wind up the toy engine and taking a perilous ride on a mechanical donkey, which he did manage to start, the little boy decided to look for his friend in some of the other rooms of the palace. The toy donkey had carried him to a door leading from the playroom into Princess Elma's bedroom, and slipping through, Reddy tiptoed around, examining the tall furniture and fittings with deep interest. In the center of the room he stopped short and gave a sharp cry of astonishment. "What do you think?" There, looking like a toy in these huge surroundings, stood a bed no larger than Reddy's own. "Now what?" gasped the little Prince of Rash in extreme perplexity. "Is that great girl doing with a little bed like this?" There seemed no answer to the question, but a sudden clump, clump in the hall made him dash for cover. Princess Elma was coming back, and just as Reddy dove headlong into one of her slippers, she ran in, the hungry tiger in her arms. "Now stay here, pet," bellowed Elma tenderly, and dropping the tiger on the floor, she skipped noisily out of the room. For a moment the hungry tiger lay motionless where he had fallen. The doll cap was down over his eyes, the doll coat in ribbons, and Reddy could see that he had had a hard day. When he did attempt to rise and try to run, the doll coat threw him down at every step, and the little prince, with a cry of sympathy and relief, ran out to help him. "Reddy!" roared the hungry tiger hoarsely. "How did you get here? Run, boy, run, before that dreadful girl gets you too. Look at me," he groaned forlornly. "How shall I ever hold up my head again? Run away, Reddy, I beg of you. Run before it is too late." "Shh," whispered Reddy warningly. "We'll run together." Cutting the cap strings with his sword and tearing off the offensive doll coat, the little boy threw both arms round the tired old tiger and gave him a tremendous hug. "To think that I, the hungry tiger of Oz, should have come to this," moaned the tiger, 2 tears running down his nose. Oh, I shall never be the same. Shh! Tonight when the giants are asleep, we'll escape. I still have the rash rubies, remember?" Holding them up, Reddy looked eagerly at the ruffled and doleful tiger. The sight of the rubies seemed to restore him a little. "We can try it anyway," he mused wearily. "But take care, here comes that awful girl back again. Hide yourself, quick!" Reddy had just time to scramble beneath the chintz chair when Princess Elma came bounding back, a plate of chicken in one hand and a doll bed in the other. Chapter 17. The Big Wig's Secret. The giantess seemed astonished to find the hungry tiger without his wraps, and picking him up began to scold gently. She was thrusting his front paws into a doll's nightdress when a loud voice from the next room made her pause. "Bother!" exclaimed Princess Elma, putting the hungry tiger down beside the plate of chicken. "I've got to take my bath, but I'll be right back." "Don't hurry," growled the hungry tiger, gnashing his teeth ferociously as Elma ran toward the bigwig nurse standing in the doorway. "Why don't you bite her?" asked Reddy, venturing out from beneath the chair. "My conscience tells me it would be wrong," groaned the poor tiger. "After all, she is only a child and really means no harm." Princess Elma was gone so long that Reddy and the hungry tiger had time to dine most comfortably on the plate of chicken and tell their strange experiences in the giant castle. The hungry tiger was amazed to learn how Reddy had been carried over the wall and listened eagerly to his plans for escape.
"We'll wait till midnight,"
whispered the little prince. "Then, with the rash rubies to protect us, we'll fall all the way down the stairs and try to find our way out of the castle." "I hope nothing has happened to Carter and Betsy," sighed the tiger mournfully. "Help me out of these horrible sleeves, boy." But Reddy advised him to keep on the doll's gown so that Elma would suspect nothing, and reluctantly the tiger agreed. "I had no idea kittens lead such hard lives," he groaned dismally. "My ribs ache from hugging, and I've been dragged around all day like a duster. Hide, Reddy, hide! Here she comes again." Reddy lost no time in concealing himself beneath the chair, and from his hiding place he watched the giantess kiss the hungry tiger good night and tuck him vigorously into the doll bed. Then, with a huge yawn, she walked over to her own bed, the tiny bed that had so astonished Reddy in the first place. "How does the great creature expect to sleep in that?" thought the little boy scornfully. "How, indeed?" Raising her hand to her head, Elma calmly took off her huge wig, and as she did she shrank so swiftly downward that Reddy clutched the leg of the chair and clapped his hand over his mouth to keep from screaming aloud. The hungry tiger, who had slept in the nursery the night before, was equally astonished at this sudden change in the princess. Rearing up on all fours, he glared in disbelief at the little girl, who now, no larger than Reddy, jumped unconcernedly into bed and pulled the covers up to her chin. The big wig, itself grown small enough to fit a mortal-sized person, lay on the floor beside her. So surprised that he forgot all necessity for caution, Reddy rushed out from beneath the chair. But the hungry tiger hastily waved him back and, curling down as if nothing unusual had happened, pretended to be asleep. Fortunately, the little girl had not seen Reddy, and crawling cautiously back, he sank down beneath the chair and tried to work out the puzzle. "These giants are frauds," decided the little boy exultantly. "Why, they're giants only when they wear their wigs." He longed to talk it over with the hungry tiger, but realizing the wisdom of hiding till all the giants were abed, set himself patiently to wait. It grew quieter and quieter in the giant's castle, and as the nursery clock tolled out 12, the hungry tiger slipped noiselessly from his bed and padded softly over to the little prince. "She's asleep," breathed the hungry tiger, "and so are the rest of these bogus bigwigs. Let's make a dash for it, my boy." "I've been thinking," mused Reddy as he helped the hungry tiger off with the giant doll dress, "I've been thinking that it will take a long time to get out of the castle and across the city. It might take us till morning." "All the more reason to start at once," urged the hungry tiger. "Come along, let's start now." But Reddy stood staring thoughtfully at the white wig beside Princess Elma's bed. "I've been thinking," repeated the little boy, "that if I put on that wig I might grow into a giant myself, run 100 times faster than I can now, and fight anyone who tries to stop us." "Better not," shuddered the hungry tiger nervously. "It might stick to you. Come along, hop on my back, and we'll manage somehow." But Reddy, remembering the steepness of the giant's stair and the hugeness of the giant city, began to creep determinedly toward Elma's bed. As he did, Elma stirred uneasily in her sleep, and alarmed lest she wake and seize the wig before he could, Reddy snatched it from the floor and clapped it on his head. "Stars!" Up like a beanstalk shot the little boy, till he feared his head would crack against the ceiling. As he grew, the chairs, tables, and furniture that had seemed so immense assumed an astonishing smallness. The hungry tiger, running in a frantic circle round his feet, looked as he must have looked to Princess Elma, a very tiny and cunning kitten. Taking a long breath, Reddy leaned down, picked the tiger up, and ran out of the room. The hungry tiger was scolding bitterly under his breath, but Reddy had to hold him up to his ear to discover what he was saying. "Mind what you're doing," rumbled the hungry tiger crossly. "I'm tired of being picked up like a bundle of rags and tossed about. Don't squeeze me either, or I'll bite off your thumb. Grr, off, I'm real mad at you." Chuckling a little to himself, Reddy promised to be careful, and tucking the hungry tiger gently beneath his arm, ran down the richly carpeted hallway. He could not resist peeping into some of the rooms, and everywhere the same sight met his eyes. Tiny beds stood in the midst of gigantic bedchambers, and the giants themselves, no bigger than ordinary folk, sleeping comfortably without their wigs. "It would be a great chance to capture the city," mused Reddy to himself, and for a time wondered whether it might not be fun to try. But he was so anxious to see Betsy and Carter and continue his search for the lost ruby that he decided to let the foolish bigwigs rest in peace. Quickening his steps, he hurried downstairs, unbolted the doors, and let himself out of the castle. Several bigwig guards looked at him curiously as he hurried down the street, but they made no attempt to stop him. "It's funny," said Reddy to the hungry tiger as he panted along. "This city doesn't look large at all, and it's not nearly so big nor fine as Rash." "That's because you're a giant now," roared the tiger, who was gradually recovering his good humor. "It looks pretty big to me. Where are we, anyway?" "Right at the gates," answered Reddy triumphantly. "Here, you, get out of the way." The bigwig guard, who was asleep with his back against the wall, blinked with surprise and resentment as Reddy spun him out of his path and slid back the bolts. Then, opening the gates, Reddy darted through, calling Betsy Bobbin at the top of his voice. "Hush!" roared the hungry tiger. "Be still, can't you? Do you want to scare her to death?" We know already how frightened Betsy and the vegetable man really were. failing to recognize Reddy in the huge big wig. As he came bounding through the doorway, they took hands and ran for their lives. Come back, pleaded the Prince of Rash, making frantic little snatches at the fleeing pair. Stop, Carter. Stop, Betsy. Don't you know me? The wig, idiot. Take off the wig, grumbled the hungry tiger, who was tired of being jostled up and down. Take off the wig. So Reddy, who had been about to lift Betsy up and explain who he was, snatched off his wig instead. In a twinkling he had shrunk down to boy size and, releasing his hold on the hungry tiger, chased merrily after Carter and Betsy.
Betsy! Betsy!
Gasped the little prince breathlessly. Don't run away from me. When Betsy, scarcely believing her ears, looked over her shoulder and saw Reddy and the hungry tiger instead of a big wig, she spun about in perfect astonishment. But the giant! Exclaimed Betsy, while Carter Green hurried forward to embrace Reddy and hug the hungry tiger. What became of the giant? Here it is! Coughed the hungry tiger, dropping Princess Elma's wig, which he had picked up when Reddy dropped it and brought along in his teeth. While Carter and Betsy continued to stare at them in wonder, Reddy related the history of his experience in Immense City and told how he had stolen the wig. Then, to demonstrate its strange power, he tried it on and turned before their eyes into a big wig himself. Well, sighed Betsy Bobbin as he took it off and shrank down beside her, I don't believe anybody in Oz is having as queer adventures as this. Do you, Carter? The vegetable man shook his head positively. But they're turning out all right, he added cheerfully. Here we are, all together again, with 2 of the lost rubies and a magic wig besides. I think we should be very happy, finished Carter, smiling at the hungry tiger. That's because you were never a kitten, roared the tiger, beginning to lick his satiny coat into smoothness again. What I've endured at the hands of that great girl no one will ever know. Ugh! Brrr! Won't she have to stay little without her wig? Asked Betsy curiously. Hope she does. Hope she feels just as small as I did, grumbled the hungry tiger vindictively. She's far safer as she is now. Maybe they'll make her a new one, suggested Reddy. Why, Betsy, they're not giants at all. Just big frauds, and I'm going to keep this wig always, just to remember them by. Don't wear it when I'm around, groaned the hungry tiger, rolling his yellow eyes fiercely. I don't want to remember 'em, and every time I look at it I'll think of the awful day I spent as a kitten. Though it was way past midnight, the 4 adventurers had so much to tell and so many plans to make for the morrow, it was a long time before they finally settled themselves for sleep. But after Betsy had heard all over again about Princess Elma's marvelous toys and how Reddy had fallen into the giant water pitcher, the little boy and girl stretched out on the soft grass beside the road, and pillowing their heads comfortably on the tender-hearted old tiger, slept soundly as tops. But Carter did not need to sleep, so perching upon a fence he watched the moon sailing across the starry sky and kept a sharp lookout for giants. Chapter 18. The Third Rash Ruby. It was wicked of Irashi to steal the throne, but I'm almost glad he did, remarked the little Prince of Rash, as he and Betsy walked cheerfully down the road next morning. Why, if he hadn't, I'd never have known you or Carter and the hungry tiger, continued Reddy, slashing at a tall weed with his sword, and I'd never have seen all these cities and celebrities. Much refreshed by their night's rest, the 4 travelers had breakfasted royally on a giant peach and set out once more for the Emerald City of Oz. Don't you ever feel homesick? Asked Betsy a little wistfully. She, herself, was beginning to long for the Emerald City and a glimpse of Ozma and Dorothy and her many friends in Oz. Well, I would like to see old Fizzenpop, admitted Reddy with a sigh. He must be wondering where I am, and it will be fun to be a prince again. Still, I am glad we had all of these adventures together, aren't you, Carter? The vegetable man nodded, but the hungry tiger did not seem at all enthusiastic. His experiences as a kitten still made him angry. What makes you think our adventures are over? He rumbled irritably. We don't even know where we are. I trust we are going in the right direction, he grunted, looking over his shoulder at Betsy. And even if we are, how shall we cross the deadly desert? We have to cross the desert before we come to Oz, you know.
Let's wait till we come to it, advised Betsy sensibly.
And if Reddy puts on his giant wig, she added suddenly, he can see whether we are going in the right direction and whether there's anything to eat, put in the hungry tiger, who had not cared much for his breakfast. Maybe there's a roast beef bush around somewhere, he finished hopefully. Reddy really enjoyed nothing better than shooting up into a giant. As he explained to Betsy, it made a chap see things in a much bigger way. So, quite willingly, he clapped on Elma's wig and, turning slowly, looked in all directions. As he was now taller than the tallest tree anywhere about, he could see for miles around, and it at once became apparent to those on the ground that he had made an astonishing discovery. "What is it?" roared the hungry tiger, rubbing impatiently against his shins. "Something to eat? Take off that wig, you rascal. Come down here and tell us what you see." But Reddy lifted Betsy into the air and placing her on his shoulder pointed excitedly toward the south. From that great height Betsy could not see very distinctly, but even so the little girl gave a cry of surprise and delight. Striding down a road that would soon cross their own came a most curious figure, none other than Atmos, the airman, and pattering along hopefully at his side, the little princess of all Oz. "It's Ozma!" cried Betsy, nearly losing her balance. "Oh, Reddy, she's coming to help us. But who is that funny balloon man? Hurry up, Reddy. Let's go meet them." "Like this," boomed the Prince of Rash doubtfully. "No!" decided Betsy, shaking her head. "It might scare her if you were a giant. Put me down and take off your wig." Almost dropping Betsy in his excitement, Reddy pulled off his wig, and after quickly explaining their startling discovery to the hungry tiger, the two children started on a run for the crossroads. "I hope she never finds out why I went to Rash," muttered the hungry tiger under his breath, as he padded hurriedly after them. Carter followed more slowly, brushing back his celery tops and perking up his corn ears. The vegetable man wished to make as favorable an impression on the little princess as possible. To Ozma herself and to Atmos, plodding wearily along the rough road, nothing could have been more astonishing than the sudden appearance of Betsy Bobbin and her friends. "Why, Betsy!" exclaimed the little fairy, running forward joyfully. "Where have you been?"
"Did you look in the magic picture and find us?" asked Betsy, giving Ozma an excited little hug. "Oh, Ozma, we've had such a lot of adventures, and now we can all go home."
Ozma looked doubtful and even more surprised, for as we know perfectly well, she had not looked in the magic picture at all, and was as lost as Betsy Bobbin. "And I thought the earth was inhabited by princesses," gasped the airman, looking in bewilderment from one to the other. "What odd and interesting specimens! Are you real?" he inquired, earnestly tapping Carter on the chest. "As real as rhubarb," answered the vegetable man with a grin. "Are you? But let me introduce the famous hungry tiger of Oz." "He has a beautiful mouth," shuddered Atmos, glancing down sideways at the tiger. "Yeah, when it is shut. Does he bite, Mr. Air Rhubarb?" "Only when I'm hungry," sighed the tiger, rolling his yellow eyes mournfully up at Atmos. "And I'm hungry all the time." "How extremely dangerous," murmured Atmos, stepping quickly behind the vegetable man. "Is this little boy creature with you, too?"
"Of course," laughed Betsy, smiling up at Atmos. "He's a prince, and we're both helping him find the lost rubies so he can be the rightful ruler of Rash."
Betsy had been trying to explain all the happenings of the last 3 days, and now, as prettily as she could, she introduced Carter and Reddy to Ozma, and Carter, Reddy, and the hungry tiger to the comical airman. Then, because there was so much to explain and consider, they all sat down under a huge handkerchief tree and talked to their heart's content. As Betsy insisted on hearing Ozma's story first, the little princess began it, the airman looking terribly embarrassed as she told how he had fallen from the clouds and then flown off with her. Reddy nodded sympathetically as Ozma described her flight through the air. Having been carried off by a pigeon himself, he knew just how she felt, and when Ozma told how the days and nights flew past in the sky and how she had punctured the airman and come tumbling to earth, Carter Green was simply rooted to the spot. For the vegetable man, in his excitement, had forgotten to keep moving. "But we are good friends now," put in Atmos hastily, as Reddy tugged the vegetable man loose. "Aren't we, little princess?" Ozma nodded and smiled and went hurriedly on with her story. After being tossed about by the rolling country, it had at last flung them into a small lake, which was on the whole rather fortunate, as they were nearly choked with dust. Atmos, in spite of his iron boots, floated nicely, and after they had washed off the mud, he towed the little fairy safely to shore. The sun had soon dried them off, and they had taken the first road that stretched ahead. "And you see," finished Ozma, smiling gaily at Betsy, "it was a lucky road, for it brought us straight to you." Betsy's story, as you can well imagine, took much longer, for the time had not flown as fast for the earth travelers as it had for the sky travelers. And as the little girl, helped out by Carter and Reddy and the Hungry Tiger, recounted her strange trip with Carter to Rash, the discovery of the Hungry Tiger, the wickedness of Irashi, the story of the lost rubies and the little prince, their escape and fall downtown, Ozma and Atmos listened with simply breathless attention. And as Betsy described their experiences with Calico and the tumble down the firefall, the airman snatched 2 handkerchiefs from the tree and began to mop his head with first one and then the other. "Too strange to believe," sighed the airman weakly. "They'll never believe this in the cloud country." Ozma smiled to herself at this, and decided that the airman's lecture would last several centuries if he tried to include Betsy's story with his own. Betsy was so out of breath by this time, Reddy took up the tale and told them all about Immense City and the giants. As he put on the wig to demonstrate its marvelous power, Ozma looked up at the little prince in frank admiration. "You have shown yourself wise and brave and deserve to rule over a kingdom," said the little fairy, as Reddy took off the wig and sat down beside her. "I wish I had some of my magic appliances with me, then we could locate the last ruby and restore you to the throne at once. As it is, we'll have to go back to the Emerald City and consult the Wizard of Oz." "Last ruby," puffed Atmos, who had not paid much attention to the ruby part of the story. "Why, I have a ruby." Reaching in one of his air pockets, the Skyman produced a sparkling square gem. Seizing the jewel with a gasp of surprise, Reddy brought out the other 2 and held them up for all to see. "Why, it is the last ruby," cried the little prince, pointing to the R, carved distinctly on the side of the gem. "It is the ruby that protects me from all danger in the air." "But how did Atmos get it?" exclaimed Betsy, completely bewildered. "Well, he is an airman," began Reddy, not quite sure himself, but too surprised and delighted to really care. "And I suppose—" "I got it from a skylark," announced the airman, puffing out his cheeks importantly. "One morning, as I was picking air currents from a large currant bush near my air castle, a skylark flew by and dropped this ruby into my hand. And as it was bright and shiny and unlike anything I had ever seen, I kept it." "Well, good for you," cried Carter Green, clapping Atmos on the back. The lark must have caught the ruby as Irashi flung it into the air. Imagine the old scalawag's feelings when he knows that a vegetable man found the ruby he buried in the garden, a fisherman the ruby he hurled into the river, and an airman the ruby he tossed into the air. Quite a coincidence, I call it. and taking 3 skips and a hop to keep from rouging to the spot, Carter perched on a rock he had found himself and began to whistle merrily.
And now,
exclaimed Betsy, running over to seize Reddy's hands, now with all of the rubies you can conquer Irashi, and nothing can ever harm you again. Oh, let's go back to Oz, growled the hungry tiger, lashing his tail a little at the very thought of Irashi. Let's go back to Oz, where the meals are regular and a tiger's a tiger. Reddy can live with us, and we'll all have fun together. That is, if we can ever find a way to cross the desert. I'll carry you across, volunteered the airman, looking down at his boots. I'm big enough, and I'd do anything for little Ozma. I'm her errand boy, he grinned, winking at Carter Green. And I'm Betsy's, declared Carter proudly. Jumping off the stone, he began hopping around like a jackrabbit, and Ozma could hardly keep her eyes off the comical little gentleman. Let's start, fellows, suggested Carter, squinting up at the sun. Perhaps we are nearer this desert than we think, and as we're not sure of the way either to the Emerald City or to Rash, we'll have to go where the next road takes us. The desert lies over there, announced Reddy, pointing toward the east. I saw the gleaming sand when I had on my big wig. Then let's go east, sighed Ozma, seating herself contentedly on the hungry tiger. In a twinkling, Betsy hopped up beside her, and with Reddy pacing proudly ahead and Carter and Atmos ambling comfortably behind, the little procession started off. Chapter 19. Reddy restored to the throne. The time passed most merrily for the travelers. Carter and Atmos were so interested in each other, and Betsy and Ozma were so busy exchanging their strange experiences, they scarcely noticed the country through which they were passing. But after an hour's march, Reddy, who was still ahead of the others, gave a loud cry of surprise, for he had caught a glimpse of the pink towers of Rash. "We've traveled in a circle," panted the little boy excitedly, "and here we are back where we started from." "Well, shall we stop and conquer Irashi or go on back to Oz?" queried Betsy. "The deadly desert is on the other side of the city, and we could easily march around it." "March round by all means," roared the hungry tiger, who had his own reasons for avoiding Rash. "In the Emerald City, Ozma can do the whole conquering by magic, and then if Reddy still wants to return to his measly little kingdom, she can transport him with the magic belt." The little fairy looked inquiringly at Reddy, but Reddy lifted his chin and, fingering his sword lovingly, shook his head. "A prince should conquer his own enemies," declared the little boy bravely, "and after the way Irashi treated us, I really ought to conquer him." "But can 6 people conquer a city?" gasped the airman, rolling his eyes a bit wildly. "In the sky, it takes an army." "I've seen 1 person conquer a city in Oz," boasted Betsy proudly. "Come on, Red, I'll help you." "So will I," cried Carter Green, picking up a stout stick. "And we have the Rash rubies, remember? I don't know much about earth battles, but I can tread on a few toes," offered Atmos, clumping up to the little prince and tapping his boots significantly. "And if you're set upon it, I'll bite off a few heads," roared the hungry tiger. On to Rash. Bidding the little girls hold tight, he went charging full speed over the hill, Reddy, Atmos, and Carter racing breathless after him. Now it happened that Irashi and his chief scribe were having luncheon in the castle gardens. They had long since dismissed the hungry tiger and the little prince from their evil minds. You can therefore imagine their astonishment and dismay when Reddy and his companions came hurtling through the trees. The little army had rushed impetuously past the guards at the gate and, after one glimpse of the hungry tiger, the Rashers they encountered in the city had fled like leaves before the wind, so that they had reached the castle without interference. At sight of the huge airman, Ipti, who had been about to pour himself a cup of coffee, gave a frightful scream and scrambled nimbly into a tree, while Irashi, seizing a silver whistle that hung round his neck, blew 3 shrill blasts and, drawing his scimitar, made a savage slash at Reddy. But the scimitar slid harmlessly down the little boy's cheek, and the coffee pot, which Ipti hurled from the tree, bounced like a rubber ball off his head. "It's the rubies, the rash rubies," exulted Betsy Bobbin. Betsy and Ozma had jumped off the tiger, and the great beast crouched at the foot of Ipti's tree was glaring upward with a look so terrible that the scribe of Rash trembled till the very branches shook. "See what's comin'," coughed Carter with a warning wave toward the castle. In answer to Irashi's whistle, the entire army of Rash was advancing upon the invaders. "Spinach, gammon, and spinach!" spluttered the vegetable man wildly. "Is that what you call 'em?" panted Atmos, and putting the little girls firmly behind him, he made ready to tread upon the army's toes. Swinging his stick like a flail, Carter took his place at Reddy's right and, roaring like a dozen cannons, the hungry tiger placed himself at the little boy's left. Reddy himself, giving no attention to the frantic slashes of the scimitar nor the furious advance of the Rash army, was pushing Irashi steadily backwards. And as the old rascal, breathless from his pummelings, turned to see whether his army were coming, Reddy snatched off Irashi's crown and tossed it Betsy Bobbin.
Keep it for me, Betsy,
puffed the little prince.
I can't use it now.
Clinging anxiously together, both little girls began to wish they had persuaded Reddy not to conquer Irashi. How was one small boy, even though he was helped out by 3 magic rubies and 5 loyal friends, to conquer the entire army of Rash? But Reddy's plans were all made. As the Rashers rushed upon him, as the airman got in one splendid kick and Carter one tremendous whack, the little boy clapped on the giant's wig. You have never seen a more terrified and bewildered company. The screams of Irashi and his guardsmen, as Reddy shot skyward, nearly deafened Betsy and Ozma. And as he began to pick up one and then another of the soldiers and take away their swords, their terror was pitiful. They crawled, ran, leaped, and tumbled in a wild scramble to get away, the hungry tiger snapping viciously at their heels, and the airman helping them most efficiently with his iron boots. In one moment more, not a Rasher was to be seen anywhere. "And that," grunted the airman, rubbing his hands together with great glee, "that is the end of the gammon and spinach." Irashi would have fled too had not Atmos seized him by the pantaloons and swung him up in the tree beside Ipti. By this time word of the frightful battle had reached the castle, and Fizzenpop, his turban standing straight on end, came flying out to see what had happened. But even Fizzenpop's knees smote together when he saw the great giant striding up and down the garden, and when the giant actually lifted him into the air, the Grand Vizier gave himself up for lost. Betsy and Ozma, delighted at the splendid victory, now came hurrying over, and while the hungry tiger guarded the 2 rascals in the tree, Reddy took off his wig and told Fizzenpop the story of their adventures, proudly displaying the 3 magic rubies of Rash. At sight of the rubies, the delight and astonishment of the Grand Vizier knew no bounds, and after embracing Reddy a dozen times and prostrating himself twice before each of the others, the old statesman rushed back to the palace. Next instant, the tower bells were tolling out a joyful welcome to the rightful ruler of Rash, and Fizzenpop himself, in his best turban and tunic, was reading a proclamation from the pink balcony stating that Everd, the Scarlet Prince, had returned and the rule of Irashi the Rough was over forever. "How about a little lunch?" proposed the hungry tiger, putting his paws over his ears to drown out the roars and cheers of the populace. Overjoyed at Irashi's downfall, the citizens of Rash were celebrating the victory as noisily as possible. "And what are we going to do with these 2 handsome rogues? I've a notion to eat them up." The hungry tiger roared, glaring ferociously at the trembling pair in the tree. "Well, they certainly deserve it," exclaimed Betsy, looking severely at Irashi and Ipti. "Don't you think so, Carter?" The kind-hearted vegetable man pulled his corn ear in embarrassment. "Let Ozma and Reddy decide," murmured Carter in a low voice. "They're not an earthly bit of use to anyone, but perhaps they'll reform," he finished uncomfortably. At Carter's words, the airman gave a sudden bounce, and a gleam of purpose came into his round eye. "Tie them up," advised Atmos, "especially that prickly-fingered one. Then, after lunch, we can decide what is to be done." "All right," agreed Reddy, and to be sure that they would not escape, he put on his big wig. Then, picking the two rashers out of the tree as if they had been toy soldiers, he wound them round and round with rope that Carter obligingly fetched from the castle. Ipty's pen and pencil-y fingers he bound up securely in strips of his handkerchief, which, grown to giant size, was large as a sheet. Then, with the two culprits tramping gloomily before them, the conquerors marched gaily to the Pink Palace, where a splendid repast already awaited them. The hungry tiger's eyes shone with joy as he looked down the long table. One entire end had been reserved for him. "Isn't this better than rash prisoners?" whispered Fizzenpop, leading him kindly to his place and waving to the rare steaks and roasts he had provided. With a troubled glance at Ozma, the hungry tiger nodded. He hoped that Fizzenpop would not tell the others why he had come to Rash. But Betsy and Ozma were talking so busily they never even heard the Grand Vizier's remark. "And if Ipty and Irashi are disposed of, I have nothing to fear," thought the tiger uneasily. Reddy, still in his shabby clothes, but wearing the splendid ruby crown of Rash, seated himself at the head of the table and, with Ozma on his right and Betsy on his left, presided in a truly royal manner. Carter and Atmos did not eat at all, but their jokes and questions kept the whole company in a roar of merriment. "It is seldom," observed old Fizzenpop, gazing fondly at the little prince, "it is seldom that a city is captured without one broken bone." "I am glad I did not break mine," said the airman, patting his chest proudly.
"Yours?" gasped Betsy. "Why, Atmos, have you any bones?"
"One," admitted the airman, feeling his side experimentally. "It's a floating rib, and I never know just where it will be." "Every airman has a floating rib," confided Atmos blandly. "It helps them to float." "Well, I think you are one of the most interesting persons I have ever met," cried Reddy, jumping to his feet. "And Carter's the other." "Oh, I do wish you would all stay in Rash. Won't you please stay? Betsy and Ozma can take turns being queen. Carter can be royal gardener and the hungry tiger, and Atmos can be anything they want." "Thanks," murmured the airman. "But what about my lecture? Besides," he looked bashfully from one to the other, "I'm engaged to an heiress and must return to the sky. But someday, when you have a few years to spare, I hope you'll all visit me and we'll go on a regular skylark."
"Oh, I'd love to,"
cried Betsy Bobbin. "You talk as if you were leaving us," objected the hungry tiger, raising himself with an effort. He had eaten a tremendous luncheon and could scarcely keep his eyes open. "I am," declared the airman solemnly, pushing back his chair. And before the others half realized what he was about, the huge fellow had seized Ipty and Irashi and vanished through the doorway. Chapter 20. Safe in the Emerald City. "Wait, wait!" begged Ozma, jumping up and hurrying after him. "Atmosphere, Atmos dear, don't you remember you promised to carry us across the desert and back to Oz?" By this time they had all run out into the garden, but Atmos did not even seem to hear their pleas. With Ipty and Irashi under one arm, he was feverishly kicking off his iron boots. "These villains," puffed Atmos, holding up his unhappy victims, "are, as Carter said, of no use on the earth at all, but they will be very useful to me in the sky. Not as good specimens as I could have wished for, but I will take them back with me, to prove that there are really people at the bottom of the air. After the lecture, I shall drop them on some lonely island where they can do no further mischief," declared Atmos calmly. "Hurrah!" roared the hungry tiger, overjoyed that his secret would now be kept safely. "After the lecture," gasped Ozma faintly, "but that will be years and years by sky time." "Years and years," acknowledged Atmos with a grin, and freeing himself from one boot, soared 100 feet into the air. "Look out below," he called warningly. "Here comes the other one." they had just time to dodge aside when the other iron boot came crashing to earth. "Goodbye," shouted the airman in a faraway voice. "Goodbye, little princess. I'll see you again sometime."
Goodbye,
called Ozma sadly. Standing on tiptoe, the whole company strained their eyes to catch a last glimpse of their strange fellow adventurer. But Atmos and the two wicked Rashers had already disappeared above the clouds.
Oh,
wailed Ozma suddenly. "How are we going to cross the deadly desert now?" "Don't cross it," begged Reddy again. "Stay here. Please, stay here." "Maybe Dorothy or the wizard will look in the magic picture," suggested Betsy hopefully. "Watch out, Carter. You're taking root again." With a little exclamation of annoyance, the vegetable man jerked himself loose and began to comfort the Princess of Oz. It was really the best thing that could have happened, he assured her eagerly. With Irashi and Ipti out of the way, Reddy can rule his kingdom in peace, and while those two rogues will not really suffer, they will be kept out of mischief for years to come. "That's so," mused Ozma thoughtfully, "and I'm rather glad Atmos has some proof. He was such an old dear when you got to know him." "You may have my big wig if you wish," offered Reddy generously, "but I'm afraid, even as a giant, you could not step across the desert."
no, sighed Ozma. I suppose not.
Besides, every ruler should have at least one magic possession. With the rash rubies and the giant's wig, you ought to be able to rule for many years without any trouble. "How about the rubies?" asked Carter. "Wouldn't the ruby that protected us from the Gnome King protect us from the burning sands? Why, maybe it was that ruby that helped us to cross the desert in the first place. I had it then, you know."
I thought it was the quicksandals,
said Betsy. "Maybe the ruby would not work on sand, Carter, and I have thought of something," cried Fizzenpop, who was anxious for Reddy to keep all of his magic treasures. "It would be unwise for Her Majesty to risk crossing the desert with only the ruby to help her, but with our marvelous canes nothing could harm her at all."
"Canes," murmured Ozma.
"Hurricanes," smiled the Grand Vizier. "With our patent action triply guaranteed hurricanes, you can all cross the deadly desert and safely return to Oz." "Oh, Fizzenpop!" exclaimed Reddy in delight. "Why didn't I think of that?" The Hungry Tiger rolled up his eyes and shuddered, but the others, who had never ridden a rash hurricane, were charmed with the Grand Vizier's suggestion. That evening, after Reddy had shown Ozma and the others all over his pretty pink kingdom, and after the populace had given 3 cheers for the rescuers of Rash, Fizzenpop took 5 hurricanes from the umbrella stand. 5, because at the last minute Reddy insisted upon going to the Emerald City too. Giving Fizzenpop the giant wig, but keeping the Rash rubies himself and promising to return in a month, Reddy mounted his hurricane. Then, at a signal from the little prince, each traveler clapped the head upon his cane, and in 5 furious flashes they were off for Oz, and 5 minutes later, a little shocked and breathless, dropped down in the Emerald City itself. Knowing that dear, delightful place as you do, you can imagine the welcome accorded the travelers. There were feasts and processions and storytellings and parties enough to satisfy even the Hungry Tiger. For days nothing was talked of but the marvelous adventures of Betsy Bobbin and the little Princess of Oz. Carter Green was so sought after and invited about he could not have taken root even had he wanted to. The little Prince Everett has since returned to his own country, but often comes over to spend a pleasant evening in the castle, bringing along his big wig to entertain the Scarecrow. As for the Hungry Tiger, he never drops off to sleep without thanking his stars. He is not a kitten, and if at times he looks a little hollow-eyed and wan, he is on the whole happier than ever, for he has learned that it is better to have a stomachache than a heartache, and the heartaches he had in Rash, missing his friends, cured him forever of the desire to eat a live man. In the Pink Palace of Rash, the iron boots of Atmos are still shown to visitors, to prove that an airman really visited that country, and on clear nights old Fizzenpop, with a telescope, tries to catch a glimpse of his wicked countrymen.